Perhaps you've heard that to attract coaching clients, you need to have the know, like, and trust factor. If you're unsure how to build this in your business, then today's episode of the show is for you. We're going to explore how to create content that generates the know, like, and trust factor. Let's dive in. Hi there, welcome to the Wholehearted Business Show. I'm Laura. I help heart-centered and highly sensitive health and life coaches get more clients, grow their businesses, and live the best lives while they do it. And today on the show, we're talking all about how to create content that develops, that grows, that generates the know, like, and trust factor. And we're going to explore exactly what the know, like, and trust factor is and why it's important if you want to get clients as a coach. Before I dive into that, a quick reminder that my new program, the Searchable Show Method, is going to be starting this week. So if you are watching this the week that it goes out, if you're listening to this the week that it goes out, on the 3rd of July is the day that we start. So you can join up until like 8 p.m. UK time on Wednesday the 2nd. If you want to create a show like this one that you are listening or watching, then do check that out, that program. We're going to do it over 8 weeks. It's a live round. I don't think I'll do another live round of this, so it might be the last chance you get to do it live and have like the Voxer support, the voice note coaching, an additional one-to-one. There's some other bonuses in there as well. So if you want to market your coaching business, create a foundational marketing strategy using searchable platforms like YouTube, your podcast, a blog, Pinterest, and so on, then that is absolutely the program for you. Please go and check it out. The link will be in the description. But back on to today's show, we're talking all about how do we create content that generates know, like, and trust, so ultimately we can attract more clients. So what's important about the know, like, and trust factor? Ultimately, it is a bit of one of those kind of like slightly annoying marketing terms that is overused a little bit, but that is also actually true and actually really, really useful and good. But people talk about it all the time. But what it really means is, the theory goes, people will buy from and work with people that they know, like, and trust. Businesses that they know, like, and trust. And if you think about any situation where you might be investing a lot of money in working with someone, it's likely, not always the case, sometimes, the rule is broken, but generally speaking, you are going to know, like, and trust that person before you drop thousands potentially of dollars, pounds, etc., for a high level coaching package. So this is how important it is. If you want to attract clients, the likelihood is that you need to develop this somewhere. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can do that outside of your content, but that's what we're going to focus on today. There's things that you can do on your website. There's certain language you can use in your copy. There's all sorts of different things. There's certain emails you can do. All sorts of different things that you can do to generate and grow that in your business. But today we're going to focus on how do we do this in the content that we create to market our coaching business, which for me is probably one of the most effective ways to generate know, like, and trust. So the first tip I have before we actually get into the content creation itself is to create more than you consume. And the reason for that is, if you are basically like spending loads and loads of time looking at what everyone else is doing, that does influence how you then show up. And what tends to happen is you start to subconsciously just recreate what everyone else is doing. Now, don't get me wrong, we are all influenced. None of us kind of exist in a vacuum, in a bubble. We're always influenced by what other people are doing, by what other people are sharing, what the trends are in the online space. We're always influenced by that. But when we are doing a lot more consumption of other people's content than we are doing creation of our own, we can start and lose our voice. And one of the biggest ways to lose the know, like, and trust factor is to not actually have your own position and your own kind of unique way of communicating, like you, which we're going to get onto. And to be honest, spoiler alert, most of these tips come back to ways in which we get to be ourselves in the way that we create content. So the difficulty is, when we're consuming a lot of other people's content, we do kind of lose a little bit of the sense of who we are, what our voice is, what we want to say, the way that we want to create content, and we lose a bit of originality. And again, you could get into the argument that nothing is really original anymore to a certain degree. But I do think that if you are struggling to kind of find your own voice, just shut out the other voices for a little while. Just focus on what it is that you're doing and allow that to come out. Give yourself space for that to develop, because that is going to be a really big way that you create the know, like, and trust, is by kind of honing into who you are, your authentic self, like all of those amazing things. So when you're consuming a lot more of other people's stuff, it's really difficult to do that. Another way for you to create content that builds know, like, and trust is to share your own experiences. So especially in today's age of AI, generated content, of like just the masses of content that's available out there, actually creating content where you share your own experiences rather than just kind of teaching people and giving people tips or doing how-to things. Actually sharing, well, this is what this has looked like for me, is a really great way to give people a little bit of insight into what, you know, your kind of life looks like and kind of the way that you're doing these things yourself. It kind of shares a different perspective, and I honestly think that everyone's lived experience is going to be a little bit different, and there's a lot of value in that. So don't forget to think about the ways that you can share your own experiences, even if it's not necessarily related to your niche, but you know, there's a lesson that you've learned perhaps from another experience that you can bring in, and just bring that into the content that you create. And so whether it's, you know, videos, audio, whether it's written blog posts, whether it's content for Instagram, whatever it might be, or Facebook, etc., or LinkedIn, you know, can you identify any of your own lived experiences and actually share those in your content, because it does just make it more unique. There's also something about sharing your own experiences that builds trust, because if you can show people that you have done this yourself, that you've been through this process, that can build a lot of trust for people, that they can see that you've actually experienced this or done this in your own life as well. Another similar tip to this is to share what goes on behind the scenes. This is where you get into the like and the know side of things. So if you can share behind the scenes, you know, what it is that you're having going on, and you know, I've mentioned this in a few episodes of the show lately, but even just a snippet of an insight into, you know, what are your hobbies, you know, what do you enjoy doing, how do you spend your free time. Yes, it has nothing to do with your ability as a coach, but it helps people get to know who you are. And sometimes the smallest things are the things that people actually really, really connect with you around. So it might be the fact that, you know, you also love romance novels. You know, me and Mel Casebolt on one of the recent episodes of the show that I did, you know, we shared that we both were enjoying romance novels. So it can be really, really random little things, but you never know what it's going to be. Something just about you being you, sharing like behind the scenes of what's going on. And this can also be behind the scenes. And I think this is where it overlaps a little bit with your kind of sharing your experiences. But it can also be behind the scenes of what actually is going on in your business as well. That can be really interesting for people too. And again, it's just another way, especially that know and the like side of things. You know, when people get to know you and then they actually develop that likeness for you. That doesn't mean that you have to be, you know, vanilla. You don't have to like tone down parts of yourself that you're worried that people won't like, because the whole idea is that the right people are going to like you, and the people who are not a good fit are not going to like you, and that's okay, because no one likes everyone. You know, that's absolutely fine. So don't be afraid of that. But sharing that behind the scenes stuff, you know, I'm going to share next week, I'm going to share a behind the scenes episode of the show and talk a bit about what's been going on in my life and in my business and things like that. And hopefully, I'm saying, hopefully some of you guys will like me for that. But, you know, some people might be like, oh, she's doing me head in. I don't really like Laura. And that's fine, because you would not want to work with me. And I probably wouldn't want to work with you. And that's okay. So don't be afraid to share a bit of the behind the scenes. Let people kind of know what it is that you're into. Again, it doesn't have to be anything that you don't feel comfortable with sharing. That, you know, that the visibility, the stuff that you're sharing in your content, it doesn't have to be anything that you don't want to, but giving people a little bit of an insight into who you are, that's going to develop that connection, that like and that know element of this that is really, really important when people become clients. The next tip that I have is to demonstrate how you can walk your talk. So this is really where we start to kind of get into that trust element as well as the know and the like, and it's about you showing, you know, this is your way of doing things within your niche. You know, for example, in my business, you know, you guys know that I'm all about having a coaching business. You know, I don't necessarily want to make multiple six figures, but, you know, I want to have a business that feels really, really good, and I want to do things in a way that feels good to me, that's authentic to me, all that kind of stuff. And hopefully I demonstrate the ways in which I do that, and hopefully I talk about the ways in which I do that, and the way that I live out or try and practice on a day-to-day basis the things that underpin my messaging as a coach or as a mentor. And this is where you can do this with your content as well. So again, you know, just a quick reminder when I'm talking about content, this is anything that you're creating to market your business. So it is, you know, video, audio, written blog posts, Substack, you know, posts, etc. It can be anything that you post on Instagram, any, you know, carousels, it can be reels, it can be stories, it can be stuff on Facebook, it can be LinkedIn posts, you know, all of that spectrum of content. But think about how you can show that you walk your talk. And this is, I think, multifactorial actually in how this works to develop know, like, and trust. I think part of this is about actually giving you confidence in your coaching ability, because when we do walk our talk, I think it grows our confidence. I think it means that we show up in a completely different way. I think our energy is different when we really do walk our talk. When we share that again with people, they get to see that this person means business. Like, there's a congruence there between what it is that they're saying and what it is that they're doing, and that is something that's going to build trust. So really think about these things when you're creating content, and it doesn't have to be, a super big strategic thing. It can literally just be thinking about, okay, so this is how I do my morning meditation. This is what a day in the life of me eating stuff looks like. This is what my diet looks like in a day when I'm struggling with, IBS, and you're a coach that supports people with IBS. Like, actually show people what that looks like. And again, there are a lot of crossovers, between all of these tips, because they are all things that work. They're all things that share a bit more of you, a bit more of your approach, a bit more of how you're doing it. And that's really, really important to develop and grow that as well. The next tip is to have a point of view. Now, this is a tricky one sometimes, because sometimes we're scared that if we have a point of view, we're going to turn some people off, and, people are going to come for us and all this kind of stuff. I doubt that you probably have a niche that is that controversial. If you do, then, fair enough, there might be some nuances to work through. But ultimately, having a point of view is just about kind of saying, like, this is the way that I think about this topic. This is my approach to this topic. This is how I do it with people. And again, in my business, an example is the fact that I don't go on about earning multiple six figures. Like, that is not me. It's just not my style. It's not what I'm aiming for. It's not something that I can support people with, because I don't have any evidence of doing that. It's not my thing at all. It just doesn't vibe for me. And that's fine. So that's a big part of my messaging, is that I talk about having a cozy coaching business, developing strategies that allow you to thrive in your coaching business as someone who is highly sensitive and heart-centered. Because a lot of the strategies that we see, especially from other coaches who do use the rhetoric around having multiple six figures, etc., often feel really, really uncomfortable for us. And that's okay. So that's kind of my point of view. That's one of my ways that I have got a strong point of view around the coaching industry and around the way that I show up and the way that I support people. And that is going to turn off, like, the people who want to make millions in their coaching business. I am not going to be for you, and that is okay. So think about that from your point of view with your niche. And again, mine is kind of like quite linear and quite clear, and yours might not necessarily be that way. But if you can think about, okay, so like, what is my actual point of view on this? How do I differ from what other people are saying that is the, quote unquote, right or wrong way to do things? And actually really share that, like, share your point of view and share it loudly, share it confidently. It can even be things like, if you are really supportive of, equal rights, if you've got, political views and things like that, don't be afraid to share those as well. Sometimes those are the things that people really, really connect with us around. So don't be afraid to share them in your content, as long as you feel safe, because there's a big thing around safety there as well. But as long as you feel that you can do that, absolutely share your point of view. It doesn't necessarily actually have to be connected with your niche. But I think that can be really important, because people will connect with you. You will grow the know, like, and trust around some of these areas if you share it. And again, your content that you're sharing on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis, as in my case, then that makes a big difference. And then finally, the last thing, and again, these are all so interconnected. They're all just different angles of a very similar topic, really. But the final one is to be yourself. Try not to replicate what other people are doing or what other people are saying or other people's, like, voice. I can remember back in, like, it was like 2011, kind of 2012-ish, I think it was. And Chris Carr was like the big health coach, and she was talking about, crazy sexy diet and all this kind of stuff. And you just had all of these coaches coming out, and they all sounded like Chris, and they all looked a little bit like Chris. And that was fine, that she was like the example of someone who was doing this on a huge platform and a huge basis, doing health coaching and, creating content around it. And a lot of people were really inspired by that, but kind of lost a little bit of their own voice through that. And again, with AI, we have got to be really, really careful that we don't lose, like, the way that we speak or the ways that we communicate concepts or ideas and things like that, because without that, you just sound a bit bland. It just kind of, it's it's just really difficult. And now I do get frustrated sometimes because you can see AI generated content and it's just word salad. And no one's going to connect, no one's going to know, like, or trust you if you are putting out content that is fucking word salad. It's not helpful. So as much as AI has its place, as much as AI is really, really helpful in many, many ways, as much as I use AI in different places, don't forget that actually, like, being yourself and talking as yourself is really, really important too, because that is where, again, that connection happens. And know, like, and trust to a big degree is ultimately connection. It's people connecting with you. It's connecting around common experiences. It's connecting around the sound of your voice, your accent, how you look. Like, it's all sorts of different elements. But like, specifically know, like, and trust, you know, to know and like someone, they need to know a little bit about who you are, like what your background is, what your hobbies are even, you know, all that kind of thing. That's how they're going to get to know you. And then the trust side of it, like, show that you are practicing this in your real life. And like I say, there's a whole bunch of other ways that you can develop know, like, and trust in your business outside of your content. And maybe part of, you know, creating content that does this is around dropping in, you know, social proof from clients that you've supported. Maybe it's about talking about your qualifications and experience in some of your content. Maybe it's simply about creating content that actually kind of allows you to really own your expertise and really share about that. And again, you know, I've talked about this in my recent summit in Social to Search. I talked about, you know, owning your expertise as a coach, and all of these things kind of come together to develop this. And again, you know, just to give a shameless plug to the Searchable Show method, because again, creating content in the way that I do with video on YouTube, hello, people on YouTube, podcast, hello, people who are listening to the podcast, and on my blog, you're kind of getting all different angles of me, I suppose. You know, if you're watching me on YouTube, you're going to see how I move my hands around like a crazy person. If you're listening on the podcast, you're going to hear my kind of slight Geordie accent, my northern English accent. You know, all of these different things kind of come in, and then hopefully as well, through sharing the content that I do, you can hear that I know what it is that I'm talking about, that I actually, what I say makes sense when it comes to running a coaching business. And again, this is how you can do that too with your content. Another big part of this as well, in creating the know, like, and trust, is having a form of consistency. So while the content that you create and the topics that you talk about and the things that you weave into that is really, really important, having some form of consistency can really help with the trust aspect as well. You know, I've been doing this now for, you know, 14 years. In fact, I shared in a recent email to my list a screenshot of my website from 2014. So I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to take your money and run off. Ultimately, I really feel that creating content in the way that I do through the Searchable Show method is one way of creating content that has the know, like, and trust factor really built into it. Because if you are creating content in this way, you know, certainly, you know, the way that I teach in my program around this, you will ultimately automatically be generating know, like, and trust. And as we said before, it is really, really key for that when you want to attract clients, because although there's unicorns out there, most people will not be dropping a lot of money on, you know, people's bigger coaching programs if they don't know who you are and trust you and like you to a certain degree. So this is why this is important. So again, do go and check out the Searchable Show method. As I record this, I've already had a few places go, and there's only 10. So do go and check that out if you are interested, because they could well go quite fast. Do go and check it out. The link will be in the description, so go and check it out if you're interested. But I really hope that's been helpful. Like I say, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's really, really interesting to me, the ways that we do this. And it's not about having to artificially manufacture it. It's literally just about uncovering it and kind of weaving it into what it is that you do and the way that you show up. And, you know, that's really going to help people to get to know you better, the know, like, and trust. So I hope that's been useful, everyone. As always, I really hope that you're doing well. Please leave me a comment if you watch on YouTube. Let me know what you think of this episode. Let me know what you do to create the know, like, and trust factor in your business. If you're listening on the podcast, there's a little link in the description. You can click and leave me a message. Let me know what you think of the show at the moment. Let me know if there's any topics that you'd like me to explore as well. I'd love to know. Okay, guys, I will see you next week. Take care. Bye.